Environment team and Poverty and Social Protection team of Youth Policy Forum, we have tried to arrange a webinar that is not much on a topic that is not much spoken of, but is uprising and is very timely. So today our webinar will be on the relation between climate change and gender-based violence in Bangladesh. So hello, I will be your moderator for today. My name is Shakila Nahar and I'm currently the lead for Gender and Inclusivity team here at Youth Policy Forum. We have some wonderful panelists on board with us today who I'll be getting to one by one now. So Dr. Golam Rabbani, sir, can you please introduce us to yourself?
Thank you so much. Well, this is Dr. Golam Rabbani. I'm currently, working at BRAC. In fact, my current position is the head of the Climate Bridge Fund Secretariat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. It really means a lot to us to have you grace your presence at today's webinar, and we're really looking forward to hear your insights on this issue. Shujon, can we have your introduction, please?
Okay, thank you. This is Nasirul Haq. Currently, I am working with Terre Homes Foundation as program manager. And additionally, I am also supporting Youth Policy Forum. I am working there as a fellow of Gender and Inclusion team.
Yes, thank you so much for adding that. We at the Gender and Inclusion team always love to have your ideas, insights, and presence supporting us in every work we do. And your presence here today also means a lot. Zahidul Bhaiya, can we have your introduction, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Zahid Chashuto. I work for a grassroots organization, Uttaran, and I look after their climate change and water governance program. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fa. It really means a lot to us when we actually have the insights from people who do work with the grassroots, because we believe climate change is the issue that we, from probably the electrified AC rooms in our urban life, cannot very much think of, or at least fathom to the very root levels as those that the people living in the grassroots do. People who actually live in climate change prone areas, who see river erosions every other day, or who see flooding or cyclones every other year. The experience that they share comes from the very grassroots, and I think it is very important that you can bring those insights for us here today. Thank you so much for gracing your presence here. So with us, we also have Ridwan Riham. How would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep. Hello, everyone. I am Ridwan Uzzaman Riham, currently studying in University of Western Australia, and I am an associate of the environment policy team at YPF, and also an associate of the CUBE team of YPF, which is a coalition for upgrading Bangladesh economy. And I have been working with YPF on and off for like last 2 and more so years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paz. So without further ado, I think there's a lot of material, a lot of ideas and insights that we will like to discuss today in our webinar. So to start off our webinar, we would like to present some of the findings that we from YPF and in collaboration of 3 teams have been able to find on this issue from the work we do, the research we do, and the knowledge we gather through secondary and primary research, right? And the knowledge that our fellows share with us, our experienced leads, co-leads do share with us. So can we start with the presentation, please?
Yeah, okay. So this is the presentation based on our topic of the webinar, and this is called, the presentation is titled Silencing the Echo, Exploring the Intersection Between Climate Change and Gender-Based Violence in Bangladesh. So I, Redwan Riham from the Environment Policy team, will be starting the presentation. So our presentation is titled as From Disaster to Desperation, how unveiling the intricate connection between climate change and gender-based violence. So let's go. So I will start my presentation by giving a brief overview of how the impact of climate crisis in Bangladesh. So we are seventh globally for climate risk due to climate change and global warming, and rising cyclones, unpredictable rainfall, and sea levels, and also like drops is causing huge displacement, farmer sanitization, and livelihood disruptions in our community. And also in 2020, 4 million people fled homes due to flood. And these whole climate crises are actually creating some ripple effects, and one of them are gender-based violence and like overcrowded camps, rising sea levels, uh, are actually creating some broken social systems, which is increasing our vulnerability in all communities, and especially for women and girls. Issues like food insecurity, diminished earnings, unfavorable harvests, and livestock loss are heavily exacerbated by climate change. So next slide, please. So the climate crisis is heavily influencing the gender-based violence, especially in the marginalized communities. It's like the the but since we are getting more vulnerable day by day, it's get it, we it's making our communities more and more vulnerable in low-income areas, rural regions, and indigenous communities, because like um, women were environmental defenders also has been assaulted and killed while defending environmental commons and stuff. So let's go on the next slide. Um, yeah. So due to climate change, there is a rise in early childhood marriages, and also like these climate changes. Suppose there is no home, or like the for the river erosion we cannot live. So people think that marrying of their children will be, especially women, girl childrens are helpful, because it's always good to have one less people in your home. Is thought by the marginalized community as well, and the poor earning and like the less earning and like the discontinuation of education is always very telling things, and this ones the all of the things are heavily induced by climate change. And so climate havoc is turning to a violence, and it's a disturbing reality in our Bangladesh. It's turning our shelters into battlegrounds, because like when we flock into cyclone shelters or like flood shelters, this is making our lives hotbeds of violence, and we are creating surge. We are having a surge in human trafficking as well, and also at the same time, um, where there is a lot of people, we are having trouble in order to like having to tackle our primal instincts and so on and so forth. But for this reason, we have to empower women as a shield against the climate linked violences. And also at the same time, we need to have a crucial strategy for resilience, tackling challenges, and have some pivotal initiatives, so that we can combat all these GVVs induced by climate impacts and so on and so forth. So this is the change we are proposing. We are proposing an unity against climate induced violence, because we need some urgent global action. We need some financial and technical support. We need knowledge sharing among every sectors of life, from elites to and yeah, bridging the gap between classes and stuff. And we need to design some resilient practices, and we need to collaborate and have and invest ourselves into solutions again of this against climate induced violence. Thank you. So these are the references I have used for my presentation and for my writing as well. And this is the highlights we did this is the works we did last year as environment team. so that we can show that how much YPF can do as a part of advocacy in reducing the climate change induced gender-based violence. So now I'm handing over the presentation to our social protection team, who will analyze the gendered impact of our climate-related events. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihamba. So before we go further with the presentation of the social protection team, there are some insights that we would like to collect from our panelists. So I'd like to start with Zahid. So, when in his presentation, Ridwan Bhai mentioned how marginalized communities now think of, climate change as an added disaster, an added risk, and how they have the built-in settings that, in a situation that is so critical and I'm facing a crisis, there's a lack of resources. It is better to have one less member in the family. But we would like to know what other types of gender-based violence do you see at the field levels when you go to climate change prone regions? And what are interventions that you think are very necessary right now to prevent them?
Well, thank you so much. I don't think there is one particular answer to that. But obviously, from the little experience I have, the thing is that the gender-based violence, even if we associate with climate change, yes, climate change does trigger this, but this has been a problem. This is like all the things we have seen right now after a disaster is mostly symptoms. Rather, we do need to understand the root causes of gender-based violence, how our culture works, how our society is, how there have been a structural marginalization of the rural communities, especially landless people, there's the Dalit communities, religio-ethnic minor communities, indigenous communities, if you want to mention them as well. Obviously, I work in a southwest part. There's a certain amount of indigenous communities over there. But what I'm basically trying to say is that this is a structural problem, and this have been there, and we have our cultural lackings in some sense, where the gender-based violence and other gender problems comes in. When we talk about what sort of problem does women faces or adolescent girls faces, so we're talking about symptoms. Obviously, there are a lot of symptoms. There's child marriages. There are sexual harassments. There are wash-related problems, a lot of wash-related problems. These are symptoms that we directly see. But let's talk about more things that we don't see. For example, their decision-making over household, their decision-making over their community, their decision-making over the income, their decision-making about what their family would look like. So all these things that we don't see, and maybe that's there, we just don't see. We treat symptoms. For example, there's water crisis, we provide water, and we think that the problem is gone. It's not necessary the problem is gone. Maybe before she had 2 hours of escape to collect water, and now the 2 hours of escape is gone, and she's facing different sort of gender-based violence based on her household chores. So there's a lot of things going on. So there isn't one solution to that. I don't know. I don't know how much time I have, but in terms of solutions, obviously, what I see risk here is that whenever we try to address gender-based violence, all the fundings that comes in, obviously grassroots have very limited power in deciding what sort of funding policymakers or donors or partners or INGOs gonna make. But even if they do so the right terms, it's always treating the symptoms. They would never fund, or in most cases, it's hard to find partners who want to address structural marginalization, address culture, address root causes. For example, we right now, after maybe this workshop triggers a funding for climate change and reducing gender-based violence. Obviously, all the projects would aim for maybe creating access to water, maybe treating menstrual hygiene, maybe doing some work for protection. But it's not that. That's not that's not how it started. That's what I'm basically saying. So there are other causes. Let's talk about their empowerment. Let's talk about their equal sharing of resources. Let's talk about their inheritance rights. Let's talk about their control over resources and access. So all these things comes in. But anyways, I don't know how much time do I have, but in short, that's my idea. But yes, there are problems, and climate change is increasing it every day. That's what I acknowledge.
Thank you so much, Zahid Bha. That is a really insightful answer. And the fact that even climate change itself, as it aggravates the gender-based violence in Bangladesh, different places of Bangladesh see different types of climate change problems, and hence the gender-based violence aggravated by those climate change issues are very different, right? And two very important things I noticed in your speech is one, the wash problems that we face, or that women from marginalized communities face, and the two, how we are only treating symptoms and we do not have proactive policies designed to combat this gender-based violence created through climate change, right? Or systematic reasons of why gender-based violence prevails in such cases. So my first question would be to Nashrul Shujon Bhai, what do you think should be water management policies from a gendered lens? To be a bit more specific, from when we went to Sundarganj chores from YPF, one rampant issue we came across is young teenage girls were taking hormonal medication to put a pause to their menstrual cycles because they did not have clean water access to use during that period, right? So this is something we believe is always very relevant, because a girl taking hormonal medication for months throughout her peak adolescence will always affect her for years to come, right? And these are not health issues that are mostly spoken of or they're aware of, but they have no other choice. And another thing that we would like to say is, in multiple reports on Bangladesh and the Sundarbans, to be specific, which is the greatest delta in the world, it has come up how the salinity of the water is increasing, and how women in those areas that cultivate on shrimp to sell for their families as a livelihood are developing more and more skin disorders, more and more cancers, and even a lot more cervical cancer cases, right? Due to just the salinity of water. So my question to Nashrul Bhai would be, how do you think these water management policies could be handled from a gendered lens? And my second part of the question will be to Dr. Golam Rabbani, sir, that gender-sensitive climate policies is what we think we need from Zahid Bhai's speech. How can we, at a national and global level, try to design them, specifically when climate change issues are so diverse? So, Nashrul, would you like to go first?
Okay. So I think that the scarcity of the resources like water is a life-saving resources. And during climate change, suppose climate change effect like flood or cyclone, as you said the examples from the Satkhira, like that region. So this is the resources, water-related resources that, suppose I would like to start from an example that during climate-related crisis, women and girls become more vulnerable, as you all know that. When there is a need of water, but they are not getting that water, or even there is a risk associated related to the gender-based violence. So in the so it's very much important that water management related policies should be inclusive and should be more focused on the needs of women and girls. That can be focused to address these issues.
Thank you so much, Farah. And just like Zahid Bhai had said, and you have said that whether it's INGOs or NGOs within Bangladesh or government organizations, we need to make sure that our policies or the programs we implement are gender sensitive, right? And with that, I would like to go to Dr. Golam Rabbani, sir, that how do you think in this climate change factor can we create or design policies that are gender sensitive and proactive and not just treating symptoms?
Yeah, thank you so much, for inviting me as one of the panelists to discuss this climate change and gender aspects at this point. And I appreciate the presenter, who actually, brought the critical messages that is happening due to climate change and the gender violence scenario in Bangladesh. And Mr. Jahid has added points, and my fellow colleague just added some of the points. Let's agree on that this gender violence, gender-based violence is not a new issue to this country. This is inbuilt problem in the country because of societal, because of cultural issues, and because of the life and livelihoods that we lead at the family level. Okay, patriarchal society that I want to refer to. And the second point is, as you just mentioned, Ms. Shakila, that climate change actually catalyze this gender-based violence in different pathways. And these pathways actually, can be described in different ways. For example, how the women are exposed to the different climatic hazards, and how they are becoming sensitive to these hazards, and what are the adaptive capacity that the woman and the family they have. Now the question is, there are hundreds of examples that we have this female and the women are more vulnerable than men, in terms of exposure to any type of climatic disaster. I will just give you one example. If you look at the incidences of the dengue in 2023, and dengue is one of the major 3 climatic sensitive diseases across the world, not only in Bangladesh. And if you look at the statistics, the incidences were more than 321,000. And interestingly, the infection was more at the men, but the reported deaths were more for the female. 63% of the reported death were female. So how now you see how the woman in our society is more vulnerable to climate change disaster and the associated consequences of climate change. Now the question is, how do you deal with this in terms of policy and institutional arrangement? Let me just start with the policy making process. The first thing that we need to do is, in every ministry they have a development and planning wing who actually design the projects and programs for every ministry for annual development program. So these are the appropriate guys who need to have appropriate capacity on gender issues so that they can integrate the gender aspects in their annual development plan and also in projects related to climate change and disaster. So that's the entry point that you need to start. And then you need to have a mechanism, the policy mechanism, which will cascade this capacity to from the national level to the sub-district level. The divisional level, then the district level, and then the sub-district level. And the most important point that I want to mention here and then stop, is Department of Women Affairs need to be capacitated in a larger way to play a vital role in both policy and institutional mechanism to ensure that the gender-based violence goes down in as early as possible. That's the major thing that we need to do at policy and institutional level. I have many other points, but let me stop here.
Thank you so much, sir. And it really added to how, it is a structural failure and a failure of planning out our national policies or national activities that is not helping us to prioritize where it needs to be, whether it be for climate change prone areas or whether it be for the dengue cases of 2023, and which is increasing every year, right? So this is falling under the Directorate of Health Services. So, as we go to that, we would like to move on to our poverty and social protection presentation, because we believe this all can be incapacitated when we promote better social protection policies. So, can we have Tuwafu to start presenting?
Hello. Yep. Hello. Thank you to all our panelists for their insightful input. And I'm from Poverty, Food Security, and Social Protection team, and I'll be talking about the gendered impact of climate-related events. Can we please go to the next slide? So if we look at the definition, then we see that GBV is violence directed against an individual because of their gender, and there are 4 key forms that we see. Those are physical, sexual, psychological, and economic. Next one, please. So if you look at the GBV and climate nexus, then we see that there are disproportionate impacts that we see on women, which mainly happens because of social inequalities and limited access to resources and societal norms. And is it Zoom or is it? Hello?
Yes, we
Am
can
I
hear
audible?
you. Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Give me 1 second. I can't see the slides. Oh yeah, I got it. So, and there's also, you can all see the nexus that happens because of the impacts, and we see that women are very vulnerable to climate change, and thus they face sexual violence, exploitation, and so many other things. Can we go to the next slide, please? Here we have some statistics. I can't see the whole slide, so I can't really read it. Is it a problem from my end, or?
I think we
I
can
think
see. We can see the full slide.
Yes, we can. So, if it's
Oh yeah,
okay,
I
I
can
would
see
like.
it now. No,
Okay.
it's okay. I can do it now. So here we have some statistics that women are 14 times more likely to die and to be injured during disasters. And if you look at just one specific example, we see that in the Solomon Island floods, 90% of the casualties were from women. And if you look at our country, then we see that right after the cyclone Cedar in 2007, which happened in our lifetime, there were 30% increase in domestic violence. And even in these data, we have to remember that so many incidents have been underreported and disaggregated. So even then, it's so fatal. So we can only imagine how bad the situation actually is. Can we go to the next slide, please? And from the same point, we see that there are a lot of trauma and stress associated with climate change, and particularly women face that. And here is a very important point: economic insecurity, which happens because of climate change, because their livelihood and income generations are threatened, and women, children, and everyone, they're very closely associated with agriculture in our country, right? Because of climate change, that is affected so heavily, and we see the impact on women and their economic independence. Next slide, please. So if you look at the gendered impacts of climate events, as we have heard from the panelists, that we all see the symptoms. So the first one is child marriage, and we see sexual exploitation where they resort to transactional sex because of maintaining their livelihood. Next one, please. So the third point will be limited access to services. So even though in our patriarchal society, men get access to so many facilities, but even right after climate change and like different disasters, women don't get the access to resources and services. And the fourth point will be increased workloads, which mainly affect the women because since they do not have stable jobs and earning jobs, they are the ones who have to take in extra workloads, and that's not even appreciated or acknowledged. Next slide, please. Here we have policies, advocacy, and resilience building. And here I have given some countries that have taken different policies. You can see Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian policies. And these policies mainly emphasize on shelters, funding shelters, and many other support services for women, and raising awareness and improving access to justice and education, and so many other campaigns. Next slide, please. Here we have building resilience and mitigating GBV risks and international collaboration. So I think the panelists will have better idea and they can say so much more insightful things. And I'd just like to move on to the next slide, please. So from our YPF Poverty, Food Security and Social Protection team, we did so many things in 2023 for women and just like poverty related stuff. And if you look at the series, then we have Shahar Kendrik Shamajik Shurakha Karjakram, a glimpse into Bangladesh's social safety programs, and Universal Pension Scheme, Universal Social Protection, and Strategy Paper. The next slide, please.
Thank you, Tubabu. So before we move on
Thank you very much.
Finding the existing policies, loopholes, and scopes that are there in Bangladesh, again, we'll be going for a round of questions to our panelists, right? So as from Golam Rabbani sir's speech, we have already come across how the social protection schemes or the plannings of our government have to be unified in a way that we prioritize the structure that women receive or have more access to not just education or just symptomatic resource helps, but also from the very young age they can understand what is financial independence and my own choice in whether I want to pursue a career, what type would I like, the kind of health services that I'm entitled to, my own decision making. So the fact that this has to be institutionally prioritized, right? How do we challenge the current structure, and how do you think, Dr. Golam Rabbani said that the current services that are available can be made more accessible, at least in the current status quo? Yes, we do need better policies coming up, but in the current status quo, at least, how can we tackle this with greater accessibility? Sir, are you there?
Are you asking me to respond?
Yes, please, sir.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I think this is again, very important, that we need to make sure that this gender-based violence and the social protection mechanism and the policies are all aligned. Because once we recognize the key problems, and then we sit together from different institutional representatives and look at their roles and responsibilities and make sure that these are being implemented at the ground level so that everything can be solved, at least towards an achievement, targeted achievement. The first thing that that I strongly feel that to do this, there should be a collective arrangement and develop the collective indicator and for the program they design, for the projects they design, and the indicator will definitely be related to women and gender aspects. So that is, if you have, for example, if you have like percentage of vulnerable women will be addressed under the current annual development program. So this is the collective common indicator if they have from the planning commission of the government, and this indicator needs to be touched by all 25 ministries. They are getting $3 billion from the national budget every year since 2018. So now you understand. So the Ministry of Environment will look at this indicator, and Ministry of Agriculture will look at this indicator, and then they will be responsible with allocated budget to address this gender violence, climate change, and gender aspects every year. So that is how I believe that could be the entry point to resolve some of the challenges related to this. That's number one. And number two is one thing that is still missing is collaboration between, as I was saying in my last statement, is collaboration between the Ministry of Women and Children Affairs and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. If they have to some extent, very small scale, but this needs to be much more larger than the currently they are practicing, because both of these ministries need to build their own capacity from the national level to the sub-district level. As much as collaborative programs and collaborative projects they design, they implement, I'm sure that would help them help the country to address the major problems. And then what happens with the remaining problems in the different pockets where the government cannot reach? I see one of the representative here from very rural area, the Uttaran in the southwest part. They are very strong, if I'm not wrong, in the southwest part of the country. So these NGOs and other NGOs, they can immediately reach and take leadership to ensure that the missing pockets are well addressed and reduce the gender-based violence in a larger scale. So that should be the target. That's what I see immediately, instantly. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. So since you already
I can add
mentioned
something. I can add something
sure.
in collaboration with Sir. Okay. So Sir was talking about two ministries, but I can think that the other ministry, like Ministry of Social Welfare or the Department of Social Service, that can have a great impact on these related issues or challenges, because when we go for the services available for them, even if we are, as we are talking about inclusive services, that's very much effective that if we collaborate with that department also. This is one thing. And other thing is that if we can form a climate alliance, like the organizations who are working specifically on climate change or women empowerment or gender-based violence, if they come together and form a climate alliance, that also can be a supportive network for the advocacy.
Thank you so much, Shujon. That was a wonderful input that it's not just two ministries that we need to combine, right? It is the entire plan of the government. Now, my question to Zahid Bhai would be is when we want the entire government to come together and formulate better social protection laws or policies, right? Just as Sir said, we would need better indicators. And for indicators, we would need more research, more understanding of how everything rolls out correctly. And you in your speech had mentioned that maybe this webinar will be a point to garner more funding. So one funding we know is particularly important when we talk of climate change is the loss and damage funds, right? That are always in COPs we hear that this needs to be released and we should be able to access it and use it. How do you think can we utilize this fund in a gender sensitive way or in a gendered lens to make sure that the research that our panelists and you and all have been speaking of happens and we actually get to aligned social protection policies from the government? Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, this is a very interesting question. Let's talk about the first thing you were saying. How do we address such funds like the loss and damage funds and other funds that has more context-specific approaches? The first things first. Let's talk about context-specific approaches. I know I don't know whether this is the right place to say it, but like, look at this webinar. We are 3 panelists who are male adults talking about gender-based violence, which for me, I know a lot of things about gender-based violence, but it shouldn't be the case. Not just to tick the box that there is a woman who talked about gender-based violence, but there should be actual voice and representation. The second thing is that there should be if we want to talk about and decide about how the funding should be, obviously there are policies and as Sarah was mentioning, there should be need of more collaboration, but the most important thing is to have people who actually experience gender-based violence and people who are actually marginalized to have that decision-making power. And now in our system, where does that sit? That sits with the local government, first thing first. The second thing is that but unfortunately, in most cases, that system is not very strong as we expect it to be. The second thing is that who decides? It's someone like me or Rabbani sir would decide which sectors or activities the funding would go, or a minister or a director at a government ministry would decide which sort of funding that should be. But most importantly, this is a small amount of money that we deal with. The funding would actually come from, in most cases, other than the government funding, would come from the West, and the West decides where the funding would go. But for example, let me tell you a brief story. So we were talking about different, so the last presenter was giving us examples of different sort of gender-based violence. So for example, in the last cyclone Amphan, I remember I was talking to a few women, and one of them was actually telling me that to adapt, they had to sell their golds that they used to get, they got during when they have had their wedding. And so that was the last resort, and her husband was like, let's use that, rebuild the shelters. Obviously, that always, what I've understood, and while I was talking to her, that piece of gold, whatever she had always gave her a bargaining power in family decision-making. And she lost that bargaining power. That was her last bargaining power. She doesn't have the education. She doesn't have the economic opportunities. And the only bargaining power she had in her family decision-making was that piece of gold. And that was taken away to adapt. And obviously, now we decide that, okay, we should economic loss and damage. That's what maybe the global West wants to fund. That doesn't make sense. That's not what she wants to decide. She wants to keep her gold. because that gives her bargaining power. So, but she can't decide that how I will fund, or how BRAC will fund, or how the West will fund, or how the government will fund. So what I'm basically trying to say, whatever research we should trigger, there should be, first of all, we shouldn't trigger any researchers. We should go to them and ask, do you need any researchers? They said, there is no point of research. We know all the problems. Let's do this. Maybe that. Maybe they said, okay, you have to do more research. But what I'm saying, we have to understand people's subjective vulnerability. We have to understand the context. We have to make sure that people who adapt, who invest on climate change, they are the one taking decisions. Obviously, there are global approaches like the locally led adaptation, the CBA, community-based adaptation, already going on, but this should not be only on papers. This should be on practice as well. That's one thing. And yeah, I remember, I mean, one thing, I don't know whether I'll have space to talk anymore, but one thing that I want to mention is that obviously this is a difficult process. Funding should be long-term in terms of addressing gender-based violence and climate change. This should not be a two-year project. I know Rabbani Bhai funds the Climate Breach Fund. I would definitely request him to make sure whoever BRAC partners with must have like long-term commitment in terms of addressing gender-based violence. And Climate Breach Fund is a very unique project and funding for that sort. But I must quote Bina Agarwal, and she used to say about land and women empowerment. She writes on that it's not the access to land that empowers women, it's the process of accessing land that empowers women. So basically what I'm trying to say is that these are struggles, and these struggles makes women powerful, and women should be on board with the process of fighting for their rights, on making policies and doing researches. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sadbha. That really does add a lot. Even as we, as a team, were reaching out to panelists, reaching out to each of you one by one, looking out on your expertise, right? The fact that we, even as a team, felt a dire scarcity of people of diverse backgrounds, and specifically women who could, who we could have on panels with us to talk about this issue. And even if we go to what you just said, we need women from the grassroots who are actually facing these to tell us what they need, right? So these are all these gender-based violence mitigation efforts and everything we do to direct funding, create policies or anything. My question to Nashrul Shujon would be, how can we make it more gender inclusive, and not just that, inclusive of minorities? Any effort that we put in, and as Zahid already said, when taking decisions about funding, how can we make it more inclusive and have every voice or every concerned voice that needs to be heard to the ones taking decision?
So here comes two things, that one is the short term and another is the long term. So during climate related situation, here a safe spaces can be important for the inclusiveness, and at the same time the community engagement, this is also important. And for the long-term related issues, I found that we have to dig with the intersecting factors, actually what affecting these things. So as we're talking about research, but our previous panelist, he said that when rather we go directly with them, we talk to them, then we can identify the real scenario of them. That will help us. And the accessible services, the infrastructures, that is also important for the inclusivity. Another thing is that the partnerships, there's partnerships between the government and non-government organizations, even the fund related. This is also important. Other thing is media engagement, and then integration into education campaign. These things can be supportive for the inclusivity.
Thank you so much, Priya. So, a small request to our panelists, is it okay if we do extend the lovely discussion that we currently have going on for 5 to 10 minutes? Because we are almost near the end of our discussions, but we believe to summarize all the amazing points and insights our panelists have made, we might need a few more minutes. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Should be fine.
Thank you so much. So, you know how we were talking of accessibility and how making things more inclusive. But if I add my 2 small cents here, well, this webinar is going on about people who actually need these policies, right? Are from grassroots, are people living in climate change prone areas, are probably people who will be talking in a local dialect in our local language. But discussions we have are mostly manifested by our colonial language that we all are currently using, right? So even on resources as small as this webinar, we ourselves are making it inaccessible to them, right? So with that point in mind, I would like to go on with the Gender and Inclusivity Network's presentation, which is curated in English, but I would try my best to present it as neatly possible in Bangla. So if that's not a problem, moving on to our next slide, please. So what is the Gender and Inclusivity team here at YPF? So if we speak through our work, আমরা বেশ কিছু কাজ করেছি রিসেন্টলি এন্ড উই আর অলওয়েজ কনস্ট্যান্টলি ওয়ার্কিং বিকজ যেটা প্রতিটা প্যানেলিস্টের কথাই উঠে এসেছে যে জেন্ডার এন্ড ইনক্লুসিভিটি না একটা মিনিস্ট্রির মধ্যে আবদ্ধ থাকে না। আমি এডুকেশনে গেলে ওখানে ইনক্লুসিভিটি লাগে, জেন্ডার সেন্সিটিভিটি লাগে, জেন্ডার নিউট্রালিটি লাগে, হেলথ সার্ভিসে, এনভায়রনমেন্টাল কনসার্নসে, ইকোনমিক সার্ভিসেসে, সব জায়গায় লাগে। So we are a network. We currently work on the Right Here, Right Now 2 project, which we just completed with 7 other partners, including BRAC. Non-consensual image sharing বা peddling এর আমাদের একটা project ছিল because আমাদের digital বাংলাদেশের one of the growing concerns is trolling and non-consensual sharing of images বা আপত্তিকর ছবি মানুষের পারমিশন ছাড়া বা ট্রোল করার জন্য এমনি দিয়ে দেওয়া। জিবিবির বিভিন্ন অ্যাসপেক্ট নিয়ে আমাদের বিভিন্ন অ্যাডভোকেসি ক্যাম্পেইনস আছে, not just related to climate change but climate migration as well, and of course we every year run campaigns on 16 days against gender-based violence on very discrete themes. So আমাদের কাছ থেকে একটু যদি সামনে যাই on today's webinar. Next slide please. So আমাদের এজেন্ডাটা কি from the Gender and Inclusivity team is আমরা policies বানাতে চাচ্ছি যেটা climate change আর gender-based violence কে of course আমরা চাচ্ছি যে forefront-এ থাকুক, এটা minimize হোক, but climate change যে এটাকে আরো ভয়াবহ করে দিচ্ছে এটা আমরা acknowledgement-এ আনতে চাচ্ছি, and acknowledgement-এ আনার সাথে সাথে আমরা চাচ্ছি যে এটা নিয়ে actual ইনক্লুসিভ পলিসি তৈরি হোক যাতে আমরা ওই সিমটোম্যাটিক অ্যান্সার না দিই। আচ্ছা, আজকে একটা ফ্লাড শেল্টারে লেটস সে a woman was harassed or exploited, আমি ওই ফ্লাড শেল্টারটার সিকিউরিটি বাড়িয়ে দিই। নো, আমাদের প্রোঅ্যাক্টিভ স্ট্যান্স লাগবে, যে সিমটোম্যাটিক ট্রিটমেন্ট না। সো এই সিমটোম্যাটিক ট্রিটমেন্টটা হয় মেইনলি লুপ হোলস যেগুলো আমাদের পলিসিতে আছে ওটার জন্য, যেটার জন্য আমরা সাজেস্ট করতে চাই কিছু পলিসি রিফর্মস। And YPF আমরা এভাবে এটা কিভাবে করতে পারি এটা নিয়ে আমি কথা বলবো এখন। নেক্সট স্লাইড প্লিজ। সো যেহেতু ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ যেটা আমরা জানি হিউম্যান অ্যাক্টিভিটিস দ্বারা ড্রাইভ হয়েছে বিকজ অফ অল দ্য কার্বন এমিশন অ্যান্ড অল দ্য পলিউশন যেটা আমরা নিজেরাই করেছি, রাইট? অ্যান্ড বাংলাদেশের প্রতি ইয়ার এই কেসটা আরো ভয়াবহ হচ্ছে। From my small experience, again going back, যে সুন্দরগঞ্জের চরে আমি একটা মেয়েকে জিজ্ঞেস করলাম যে স্কুল কতদিন হলো বাদ দিয়েছো, যখন সে আমাকে বললো সে স্কুলে যায় না। বলে আপু 1 বছর। আমি বলি কেন, তার আগে কোন ক্লাসে পড়তা? 7-এ। কেন বাদ দিলা? আপু 1 বছরে 4 বার আমাদের ঘর ভেঙেছে, আমি ঘর ঠিক করবো না আমি স্কুলে যাব। সো উই আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ড যে কতটা স্ট্রাকচারাল বড় একটা ফেলার, যেহেতু আমার সোশ্যাল প্রোটেকশন একটা স্কিম নেই ফর ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ প্রোন এরিয়াস, এই নদী ভাঙনের কারণে একটা মেয়ে না, ওই এরিয়ার শত শত মেয়ের পড়ালেখা বন্ধ হয়ে গেছে। তো আমি যত একটা স্কুল থেকে ইনসেন্টিভ দিই যে তুমি আসো, তোমার রেজাল্ট ভালো হবে, তুমি পড়ালেখা করে অনেক কিছু করতে পারবে, সে যখন তার বাসস্থানটাই ঠিক মতো রাখতে পারছে না, তার জন্য পড়ালেখাটা কিন্তু অত বড় একটা ফ্যাক্টর না। আমরা মনে করি আমরা সব প্রবলেমস জানি, আমরা সবগুলো সলভ করতে পারবো, বাট আমরা যদি তাদের পার্সপেক্টিভটা না জানি, আমরা কিন্তু অ্যাকচুয়ালি বুঝবো না প্রবলেমটা কই। অ্যান্ড আমরা যদি বলি ইম্প্যাক্ট গুলো খালি এনভায়রনমেন্টের চেঞ্জের উপর না, আমরা যেটা বললাম যে এডুকেশনে যাই, হেলথে যাই, যেটা বললাম যে মেয়েরা হরমোনাল পিলস নিয়ে আটকে রাখে, যেটা জাহিদ ভাই কয়েকবার তুলে ধরেছেন যে ফাইন্যান্সিয়াল ডিসিশন মেকিং এর উপর অনেক বড় একটা এফেক্ট ফেলে। একটা মেয়ে যখন তার গোল্ডটা লুজ করে ফেলে বিকজ তার আবার বাসা বাঁধতে হবে, তার ডিসিশন মেকিং পাওয়ার জিরো হয়ে যাচ্ছে, এন্ড সিস্টেম্যাটিকলি আমরা মহিলাটাকে বা মেয়েটাকে আরো পিছিয়ে দিচ্ছি জাস্ট বিকজ আমাদের এখানে কোনো সোশ্যাল প্রোটেকশন স্কিম নেই। সো আমি নেক্সট কিছু পলিসি কথা বলি বাংলাদেশে। নেক্সট প্লিজ। সো কিছু পলিসি যেটা বাংলাদেশে কারেন্টলি আছে: বাংলাদেশ ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ স্ট্র্যাটেজি অ্যান্ড অ্যাকশন প্ল্যান, বাংলাদেশ ডেল্টা প্ল্যান 2100, ন্যাশনাল ক্লাইমেট ফাইন্যান্স মেকানিজম। এখন সবগুলো পলিসি আছে, বাট আমরা যদি পলিসিগুলো পড়ি, দে আর নট ভেরি জেন্ডার সেন্সিটিভ। আমাদের জেন্ডার সেন্সিটিভিটি যতটুকু আছে পলিসিগুলোতে, আমাদের প্যানেলিস্টরা যেটা তুলে ধরেছেন যে সব মিনিস্ট্রি একসাথে অ্যালাইন হয়ে এটাকে ঠিক মতো ইমপ্লিমেন্ট বা এক্সিকিউট করেন না। দ্বিতীয়ত, ইট ইজ নট ভেরি ইনক্লুসিভ। যতটুক জেন্ডার সেন্সিটিভিটি রেখেছেন, এসি রুমে কয়েকজন মানুষ যারা টপ পজিশনস আছে নিজেদের ইনসাইড থেকে যে সবটুক ইনক্লুড করেছেন, বাট ট্রু ইনক্লুসিভিটি মিনস আমার যেটা দরকার আমি সেটা পাবো। মাই ইকুয়ালিটি মিনস আই এম গেটিং হোয়াট আই নিড অ্যান্ড নট হোয়াট ইউ থিঙ্ক আই নিড। তো এটার জন্য উই থিঙ্ক এই লুপ হোলস গুলা চ্যালেঞ্জ করার জন্য আমাদের ইনক্লুসিভিটি কিভাবে বাড়ানো যায় ইজ দ্য কোয়েশ্চেন আমরা বারবার যেটা প্যানেলিস্টদের জিজ্ঞেস করছি, যে কিভাবে বাড়ানো যায়, কিভাবে জেন্ডার বেস ভায়োলেন্স কমানোর জন্য আমরা অ্যাকচুয়ালি পলিসিস বেটার নিতে পারি। আমার আগের প্রেজেন্টার তুবাবু বলে গেছেন যেভাবে নরওয়েজিয়ান কান্ট্রিজে, ডেনমার্ক, সুইডেনে দে ফর্মুলেট পলিসি, কিন্তু একটা ডেভেলপিং কান্ট্রি হিসেবে আমার রিসোর্স কম, তো রিসোর্স প্রায়োরিটাইজেশন লাগবে, আমার ফান্ডিং লাগবে, বাট ওই ফান্ডিং বা ওই ইউজেজ গুলো করার জন্য আমার যে পলিসিস ওখানে কিছু রিফর্ম লাগবে। নেক্সট স্লাইড প্লিজ। তো আমরা যেটা চাচ্ছি যে খালি আমরা ওয়েস্টের উপর ডিপেন্ড করবো না ফর ফান্ডিং, বাট যেটা জাহিদ অলরেডি বললেন যে অনেক বড় একটা মানি আসে ফ্রম দ্য ওয়েস্ট এন্ড দে ডিসাইড হোয়াট উই ডু, কিন্তু আমার মানুষের কি লাগবে? দ্য ওয়েস্ট ক্যান নট দেমসেলভস ডিসাইড। এর জন্য হোয়াট উই বিলিভ ইজ ন্যাশনাল বাজেটে একটা gender sensitive part of climate change induced gender based violence of course financing রাখা উচিত, and rehabilitation of climate displaced people, যেটা যারা ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জের কারণে বাসা বাড়ি হারিয়ে ফেলছেন তাদের রিহ্যাবিলিটেশনের জন্য একটা সোশ্যাল প্রোটেকশন স্কিম গভর্নমেন্টের দিক থেকে মাস্ট। কারণ যত এনজিওরা ইনভেস্ট করুক, আনলেস এন্ড আনটিল মাই পিপল হ্যাভ একটা স্কিম ফ্রম দ্য গভর্নমেন্ট দ্যাট অ্যাপ্লাইজ টু অল, আমি অ্যাকচুয়ালি চেঞ্জটা করতে পারবো না। কেন? বিকজ এই যে প্রজেক্ট চলবে, ফান্ডিং বন্ধ হবে, কিছু জায়গায় অনেক বেশি এনজিওস কাজ করবে, কিছু জায়গায় খুবই কম করবে, বাট এভরি পার্সন ইন মাই কান্ট্রি ডিজার্ভস দ্যাট সোশ্যাল প্রোটেকশন স্কিম। কেউ হয়তো বেশি কিন্তু কেউ হয়তো কম, কিন্তু যার কম তাকে যদি আমি নাই দিই, এগেন আমরা সিস্টেম্যাটিক একটা প্রবলেম ক্রিয়েট করছি আর তাদের পিছিয়ে ফেলে আসছি। এর জন্য উই বিলিভ গভর্নমেন্টের সাইড থেকে ফাইন্যান্সিং লাগবে, রিহ্যাবিলিটেশন স্কিমস লাগবে। নেক্সট স্লাইড প্লিজ। আমরা যেটা বলছিলাম যে কারেন্ট যে পলিসি আছে এদের লুপহোল কি? রেকগনিশন অফ জিভিভি ইন ক্লাইমেট স্ট্রাকচারস, যেটা এটার হয় না, there is a great lack in this. Inadequate integration of climate adaptation, আমার কোন জায়গায় আমার নদী ভাঙনে কি স্ট্র্যাটেজি হবে, আমার ফ্লাডে কি স্ট্র্যাটেজি হবে, সাইক্লোনে কি স্ট্র্যাটেজি হবে, এগুলো সবগুলো ইন্টিগ্রেট করতে হবে বাই লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট, বাই প্ল্যানিং মিনিস্ট্রিজ, বাই রোড অ্যান্ড reform ministries, by no mantris and those other ministries that we have, even health ministry, যাতে আমরা সবকিছু মাথায় রেখে something that actually works and is not tokenistic আমরা সেটার উপর কাজ করতে পারি। আমাদের ডাটা রিসার্চ গ্যাপ গুলো কমাতে হবে, যারা আমি অ্যাকচুয়ালি যারা একদম গ্রাস রুটে আছে তাদের কথাটা জেনে তুলে ধরতে পারি যে এগুলো আমার অ্যাকচুয়াল নিড, and not what the west says যে আমাদের করা উচিত। ল্যাক অফ সেফ স্পেস, যেটা আমাদেরকে আগেও বলেছেন আসল ভাই, যে সেফ স্পেস নেই এই ওমেন গুলো যাদের সমস্যা হচ্ছে। ইভেন আমরা যখন যাই, ইভেন ইফ ইউ স্পিক অ্যাজ এনজিওস, তখনও কিন্তু আমরা ডেটা পেতে সমস্যা হয়, কারণ দের ইজ নট আ সেফ স্পেস ওয়ের দে ফিল দেয়ার হার্ড অর ভ্যালিডেটেড, রাইট? সো এই মার্জিনালাইজ কমিউনিটির জন্য আমার গভর্নমেন্ট থেকেও একটা সেফ স্পেস ক্রিয়েট করতে হবে, নট জাস্ট রিলাই অন এনজিওস। বাট আমরা যেটা করতে পারি, এনজিওস এর সাথে হাতে হাত মিলিয়ে এটাকে আরো বেটার করতে পারি, কারণ আমরা জানি এনজিওস আর আইএনজিওস এ এই মেকানিজমটা এখনো ওয়েল ডেভেলপড কম্পেয়ার টু ন্যাশনাল অর্গানাইজেশনস। অ্যান্ড gender data, gender disaggregated data insufficiency আছে, যেটা brings us back to the research. And community engagement এর স্কোপটা বাড়াতে হবে, আমার লোকাল লেভেল গভর্নমেন্টের এনগেজ করতে হবে with communities before decisions are taken by members of the parliament or in the cabinets, right? অথবা একটা বিল বা মোশন পাস হওয়ার আগে। নেক্সট স্লাইড প্লিজ। তো এখানে আমরা কিছু সাজেশন রেখেছি আমাদের সাইড থেকে ফ্রম রিসার্চ উই হ্যাভ ডান। বাট my last question to every one of this panel will be, can you give us one or two ideas যে কিভাবে আমরা এই পলিসি লুপহোল গুলা বন্ধ করে ইনক্লুসিভ সোশ্যাল প্রোটেকশন পলিসি বানাতে পারি, সো দ্যাট আমরা স্ট্রাকচারাল ফেইলিয়ার দ্যাট ক্রিয়েটস জেন্ডার বেসড ভায়োলেন্স এটাকে অ্যাড্রেস করতে পারি? যদি খুবই পিন পয়েন্ট করে ছোট করে প্রতিজন প্যানেলিস্ট আমাদেরকে বলতেন, স্টার্টিং উইথ নাসির ও সুজন। Hello? Am I audible? Ashobha? I think Nashulbha is having some kind of network issue. So with that, we'll move to Golam Rabbani sir, and Nashulbha reconnect হলে আমরা তার opinionটাও নিচ্ছি। So sir, যদি দুই একটা কিছু খুবই pinpoint করে current suggestion বলতে পারতেন for us as YPF or for the government or for any NGOs or viewers of this webinar, যে কি actually করা উচিত এক দুইটা জিনিস।
Well, first thing is, I mean, there are lot of decisions and, I would say projects, programs that have been taken by the different government ministries and different implementing agencies to address this gender-based violence, climate change, and, all other relevant issues. But I think in most of the cases, if I'm not wrong, this has happened, as a piecemeal basis. I mean, there are policy, gender action plan, there are, as we have shown, Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, who is also integrated gender issues to some extent, and their Delta Plan. There are many other, plans. And now we have National Adaptation Plan, under climate change scenario. So we do have a number of plans, and we also integrated gender aspects to some extent, if not sufficient, but at least to some extent we did that. Now the question is whether the most relevant organization, 25 ministries do not need collaboration. At least a number of key ministries who have the official mandate to address climate change, to address gender-based violence, and to address immediate, key issues associated with these two major issues. And they can have this collaboration and coordination, and then implement the projects and programs, whatever they need to do. That's number one. This is not happening. If you raise this issue, they will have some type of collaboration for 6 months, and after that they forget it. And if one ministry, try to implement one project for 3 years or 1 year, or maybe more than that, project ends and all collaboration ends. It is the current level of collaboration is unsustainable. And this is not happening for long term. So we need to have a concrete, meaningful collaboration among the relevant ministries. So that's number one. Number two is, it is true, we are not rich country. We have financial limitations. But at the same time, in last 4 or 5 years, the government of Bangladesh has allocated approximately very close to $3 billion US. So we need to have an evaluation, very concrete research, how this huge amount of money is approximately $10 billion. In fact, more than $10 billion. How this money has been utilized to achieve targeted adaptation and mitigation. And what did we achieve in terms of, gender-based violence? What did we achieve? There are good number of projects were given to Ministry of Women. What did we achieve? So this evaluation needs to be done at the end of this 5 years immediately. I want to see the result in 2024. This is a very concrete suggestion that I'm trying to make. Okay. And the third is, there are, the annual development plan, and then climate change adaptation plan, disaster management. So all these ministries and their associated implementing agencies have some amount of budget every year. It is not sufficient, that I recognize, but the amount that you have, how did you really utilize, needs to be actually brought by the media so that the people know about it. The institutions at the local level, institutions at the district level, they should know about it. So media should cover the stories of this money that is being utilized to address at least the climate change and gender violence. I want to see at the end of the year, some of the media people, they will talk to these ministries where they had some amount of budget to address these problems, and they develop a story, and they communicate this message to the people. So if that happens, perhaps that would help the ministries to look at their achievement, their failure, and they can learn based on their failure. If some of the ministries, some of the agencies, they fail, they can learn, based on their failure. But we do. I mean, the bad part of it. I don't want to say this bad word, but at least I'm not sure if I should tell it as a failure. But at least if we fail in anything, that needs to be communicated to the people of this country, so that everyone has a stake. Like youth can find an option. Well, I didn't know that this amount of resources was allocated in 2023 to address the problems of youth. Do you know? Do I know? I don't know. Who knows here? If anyone knows, is the media person. Does the media person look at it at the origin and cover a story in Pratham Alo or any other daily newspaper so that the people can learn it? We don't know. I don't know. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. So we are a bit short on time, but key points we got is we need alignment in all plans, we need monitoring of our plans, and we need accountability. We need to know how it was utilized, whether it was utilized, and what were failures that we can learn from. Moving on to National Shujon, who is back with us. What would your key suggestions be for the policies to align, right?
Okay, thank you. So I would like to start with the funding issues. As we already have discussed that donors are not directly funding for the GPP program or gender-related program. But the organizations, whether it can be government or non-government organizations, who are taking different types of projects or programs. If that programs focus on the structured evidence-based programming, that would be helpful for addressing these issues, some of the cross-cutting issues also like GBB, climate change, migration. These are the things, this can be supportive. These actions can be taken. Number two is the joint network for policy advocacy. Like as YPF, what YPF is doing, and even there are other like-minded organizations, they are also doing something advocacy-related work. So a joint network can be effective. This can be taken. Other thing is that if we can use the local resources, like for the sustainability, for the sustainable local solutions, if we can initiate youth-led initiatives, that also can be a supportive network for this. And I can add, lastly, I can add one thing that currently I am implementing a project. It's called Sports for Protection, Resilience and Transformation. Shortly, we call it SPEED project. Actually, the project is the mainly the person who are the risks of vulnerability, risks of migration, or already migrated due to the climate change related issues. We're targeting adolescents and youth. They are participating in our projects, but we are doing it through a safe sports. Like the participants are participating in sports related activities. At the same time, they are learning climate change related issues, and they are also learning that how they can solve their locally climate related problem, like the climate adaptation. They are taking some youth-led initiatives. So this is the thing that is structured, and at the same time, this project is also enhancing their physical, mental, and psychosocial well-being. So these are the things that is structured programming, and that is piloting that has started in last 2022 and piloting in Kurigram in Dhaka. So these are the things that can be taken from the government and non-government initiatives that at the same time that can address all of those things. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fa. So to summarize your points, we need evidence-based programs, but everyone, whether government or non-government organizations, we have to be collaborative in our efforts and driven towards one common goal, so that যে scarcity-টা আছে resources, we are not dividing it further, but একটা common goal achieve করার জন্যই we are all dividing it amongst ourselves and using it to create a holistic change in all ways we can all over the country, যাতে সবাই আলাদা আলাদা কাজ করলে একসাথে একটা কমন গোলের দিকে কাজ করছে and resource utilize হচ্ছে and not wasted, right? And আরেকটা important point আমরা পেয়েছি যে not just depend on NGOs and government organizations, আমাদের youthদেরকেও empower করা দরকার or peopleদেরকে, যাতে তারা নিজেদের local led initiatives দিয়ে climate change-টাকে combat করতে পারে. With that, we come down to our last panelist speech for today. Zahid Bhai, what would your concluding remarks be on from your powerful insights? যে কি করা উচিত? অনেক কিছু করা লাগবে, but এখন কি করা উচিত?
তাহলে আমি একটু বাংলায় বলি। এই এই ওয়েবিনার গুলোতে একটা ঝামেলা আছে, সেটা হলো যে এইখানে কিছু বললে তখন মনে হয় যে ভুলে গেছিলাম, আরো 2-3টা পয়েন্ট ভালো করে বলতে পারতাম। তারপরে 2-3টা জিনিস আমার মাথায় ঘুরঘুর করতেছে। একটা জিনিস হলো আমাদের বুঝতে হবে যে ভালনারেবিলিটির স্টেজ কি, সাবজেক্টিভ ভালনারেবিলিটি বা কনটেক্সচুয়াল ভালনারেবিলিটি বা পিপল উইথ ইন্টারসেকশনাল ভালনারেবিলিটি, যেটাই বলি। ফার্স্ট থিং যে দেখেন, ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জে একটা ঝড় হইলো, ঘূর্ণিঝড় হইলো, তা একটা পুরুষের একরকম ক্ষতি হয়, যে একটা টাকাওয়ালা পুরুষ চেয়ারম্যান, তার একটা ধরনের ক্ষতি হয়। তারপর ঠিক আছে, চেয়ারম্যানের বউয়ের ক্ষতিটা আর একটু ঝামেলা, যে চেয়ারম্যানের বউ তো চেয়ারম্যান দেখা গেল চলে গেল যে শহরে থাকলো, আশাশুনি সদরে, আর বউ সেই প্রতাপনগরে পড়ে আছে। ঠিক আছে, চেয়ারম্যানের পরিবার বাদ দেন, একটা মধ্যবিত্ত মুসলমান পরিবারের একরকম ক্ষতি হয়। যেখানে যদি নারী প্রধান পরিবার হয় তার আরো একরকম ক্ষতি হয়। নারী প্রধান পরিবারের তো আর কেউ নেই, শুধু ওই মহিলাটা ইতালি দেখাশুনো করতেছে। ঠিক আছে, তারপরে দেখা গেল যে নারী প্রধান পরিবার, কিন্তু সে আর্লি ম্যারেজ হয়েছিল, তখন কাজী অফিসে আবার রেজিস্টার হয় নাই, কারণ আর্লি ম্যারেজ হলে লুকায়, আর 16 বছরের আগে বিয়ে হইলি 18 বছর পর্যন্ত রেজিস্ট্রেশন করেন, বা স্বামী মারা গেছে, তখন সে বিধবা ভাতাও পাবে না, কারণ সে তো রেজিস্টারই হয়নি বিয়ে হওয়ার, সে বিধবা ভাতাও কি করি পাবে। হ্যাঁ, ঠিক আছে। তারপর ধরেন আরো নিয়ম আছে যে যদি কৃষি ভিত্তিক পরিবার হইতো, তার যদি পুরুষ সন্তান থাকে সে সরকার কর্তৃক খাস জমি পাবে, কিন্তু যদি মহিলা সন্তান থাকে সে কোনো জমি পাবে না। ঠিক আছে, নারী প্রধান পরিবার বাদ দেন, চিন্তা করেন একটা হিন্দু দলিত পরিবারের মহিলা, এখন তো তারা যদি ডিভোর্সড হয় বা স্বামী ছেড়ে দেয়, তখন বাপের ঘরেও জায়গা হয় না, বাপের উঠানে জায়গা হয়। হ্যাঁ, তাহলে তার ভালনারেবিলিটি কি আর চেয়ারম্যানের বইয়ের ভালনারেবিলিটি কি, তা তো আলাদা করে বুঝতে হবে আমাদের। তার মানে পলিসি এক কাতারে স্ট্যান্ডার্ডাইজ করা যাবে না, সবার জন্য রিজনাল ভিত্তিক এবং বুঝি সময় নিয়ে হলেও বুঝি পলিসি করতে হবে। এটা হলো নাম্বার ওয়ান। সেকেন্ড জিনিস যেটা বলতে চাইছিলাম, একটা জিনিস সঠিক যে একটা তো এটা রেকগনাইজ করা, সেকেন্ড হলো যে সবসময় এটা সবাই প্র্যাকটিস করে যে ইকোনমিক এম্পাওয়ারমেন্ট এবং অ্যাক্সেস টু রিসোর্সেস, এই দুটো মহিলাদেরকে মানে সঠিক হোক বেঠিক হোক এইটাই বার্গেনিং পাওয়ার করে অনেকখানি বাড়ায় দেয়। মহিলাদের জমি থাকলে আর মহিলাদের টাকা থাকলে ইনকাম একেবারে ফাটাই ফেলতে পারে, ও আর আলাদা করার কিছু লাগে না। এটা হলো সেকেন্ড জিনিস। আর থার্ড আরেকটা জিনিস মাথায় রাখছিলাম, সেটা ভুলে গেলাম। আহ, ঠিক আছে, তা যাই হোক, এই যে আমি সবসময় একটা ভুলে যাই, বাট যাই হোক, আমি হোয়াট আই এম বেসিক্যালি ট্রাইং টু সে যে এই একটা হলো সাবজেক্টিভ ভালনারেবিলিটি বুঝতে হবে, বা মানুষের যে ইন্টারসেকশনাল মানুষ আলাদা আলাদা মানুষের আলাদা আলাদা সমস্যা সেটা রেকগনাইজ করি, সেইভাবে ডিসিশন নিতে হবে। সেকেন্ড হলো মহিলাদের ইকোনমিক এম্পাওয়ারমেন্টটা সবসময় আগেও জোর দিচ্ছিল, এখনো জোরটা কন্টিনিউয়াস দিয়ে যেতে হবে। আরেকটা কি যেন বলতে গেছিলাম, সেটা এখন যেহেতু ভুলে গেছি তাহলে আর দরকার নেই, সময় নেই। তাহলে এই হলো আমার পয়েন্ট। ঠিক আছে, যাই হোক, এই ঠিক আছে,
থ্যাংক
ধন্যবাদ।
ইউ সো মাচ প্যানেলিস্ট। সো উইথ দ্যাট আমরা কনক্লুশনে আসছি, এন্ড জাহিদ ভাইয়ের কথা থেকে একটা লাস্ট পয়েন্ট অ্যাডিং। সো আমাদের তিনটা প্যানেলিস্টের সাজেশন গুলো আমরা যদি নিই, ফার্স্টে আমাদেরকে অ্যালাইনড হতে হবে নিজেদের প্ল্যানে, কাজ প্ল্যান গুলো আমরা ইমপ্লিমেন্ট করছি নাকি এটা মনিটর করতে হবে, নিজে অ্যাকাউন্টেবল রাখতে হবে। সেকেন্ড, আমরা আসলে এই যে প্ল্যানিংটা বা অ্যালাইনমেন্টটা করছি এটাও এভিডেন্স বেসড রাখতে হবে এক। দ্বিতীয়ত, আমরা রিসোর্স যেহেতু এমনি স্কার্স, এটাকে আরো ডিভাইড না করি, সবাই নিজেদের মধ্যে কাজ ভাগ করে একটা কমন গোলের উদ্দেশ্যে কাজ করি, যাতে আমরা সবাই একই জিনিস অ্যাচিভ করার চেষ্টা করি, কিন্তু মোস্ট এফেক্টিভ ইউটিলাইজেশন অফ রিসোর্স। এন্ড থার্ড যেটা আসলাম ইজ, আমরা সবাইকে এক কাতারে ফেলে দিতে পারবো না, ইভেন when we create policies for climate change or gender based violence, right? আমার কমন একটা গোল হতে পারে টু ইনক্রিজ ওমেন ইকোনমিক এম্পাওয়ারমেন্ট, যাতে তার ফিনান্সিয়াল ডিসিশন মেকিং বেটার হয়, হেন্স এটা জিবিভি কমাবে। বাট আমার বুঝতে হবে আমার কন্টেক্সচুয়াল ডিফারেন্সটা কি হবে। আমার কক্সেস বাজারের সাইক্লোনে যে ডিফারেন্ট সিনারিওটা ক্রিয়েট হবে বা নদী ভাঙনে যেটা ক্রিয়েট হবে, সেটা ঢাকায় ভারী বর্ষণের আটকে যাওয়া একটা নারী যে হয়তো বস্তিতে থাকেন এবং ওখান থেকে কাজ করেন, তার চেয়ে আরো বেশি অনেক ডিফারেন্ট হবে। এন্ড সোশ্যাল স্ট্রাকচার, ইকোনমিক ক্লাসের বিভিন্ন পর্যায়ে অফকোর্স এই ডিফারেন্স গুলা আসবেই। সো আমাদেরকে সেন্সিটিভ টু ডিফারেন্সেস হতে হবে, বাট অ্যালাইন্ড এন্ড মনিটরিং আওয়ার ওয়ার্ক which is evidence based, এটা করতে হবে। জি জাহিদ ভাই, যদি লাস্ট করে রিমার্কস থাকে।
আমার ওই লাস্ট পয়েন্টটা মনে পড়ছে, সেটা হইলো এই যে দেখেন, মানুষের ছেলেদের গ্রামে প্যাট্রিয়ার্কি প্র্যাকটিস করার জন্য জায়গা থাকে আলাদা করে, বাজারঘাটে বসে আলাদা করে প্যাট্রিয়ার্কি প্র্যাকটিস করতে পারে। মেয়েরা ওই কালেকটিভ ভাবে তাদের পাওয়ার এক্সারসাইজ করতে পারে না। আগে যে এনজিওর একটা ভালো অ্যাপ্রোচ সমিতি করে মহিলাদের, সেটা ঠিক, সেটা আরো জোরদার করতে হবে। মেয়েদেরকে কালেকটিভলি তাদের ডমিনেন্সও প্র্যাকটিস করার সুযোগ দিতে হবে, ইনস্টিটিউশন দিতে হবে, তাদের এজেন্সি অ্যাকনলেজ করতে হবে, তাদের সংগঠন বানাতে হবে। সেসব করলে আরো মেয়েরা পাওয়ারফুল হবে।
থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ ভাইয়া। সো আমাদের জাস্ট ফিনান্সিয়াল ডিসিশন মেকিং বা ইকোনমিক এম্পাওয়ারমেন্টই না, উই হ্যাভ টু টিচ women or minorities যে ইউ আর নট সামওয়ান টু বি ডমিনেটেড ওভার, যে তোমার উপর খালি ডমিনেট করছে তার উপরে ইউ হ্যাভ টু হ্যাভ কালেকটিভ একটা ভয়েস, যাতে তোমারও ডমিনেন্স আর তোমারও সেটা ইকুয়ালি প্রায়োরিটাইজড হয়। So with that, we come to the end of today's wonderful session. Thank you all our panelists for these wonderful inputs, for these insights that were overwhelmingly thought-provoking. And with that, we would like to end today's session. Thanks to all who were watching. And hopefully we can further discuss through YPF and all organizations who have been represented through our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
ধন্যবাদ